is, it sounds like a king telling you to follow this bloodline of horrible, horrible, horrible people, and it doesn't matter because their bloodline is blessed. Okay, and Moses has this same bloodline. He's the one who wrote the Bible. It doesn't sound like the king. What's funny is what the real, like in the Pastafarian Bible. Okay, this is God tells these stories about these horrible kings because he's trying to warn you about kings and that they're dictators, that you don't want a king, that they're horrible, horrible people. And if you read the real Bible, the Pastafarian Bible, right, you would see these stories and you would see God saying how they're horrible. Don't, stay away from dictators, stay away from kings, stay away. And it's not even, the stories are saying stay away from that specific royal bloodline, Abraham's royal bloodline. He's saying any royal bloodline is bad and evil. That's the devil's work. Is if your society is based on a monarchy or a bloodline, you've got to run away from that. That's evil. You always have a horrible person just destroying society, then another horrible person that's related destroying the society, and then another person related to him destroying the society. Okay, and you would look at the Pastafarian Bible and you say that makes perfect sense. Don't trust dictators. Don't trust kings. Okay, that makes sense. Then you go over to the Christian Bible, written by a king, right, who has the same bloodline, the Abraham bloodline, saying that he has this covenant with God, and that you can't, unless you follow his bloodline, let him be leader. If you don't let his bloodline be leader, you can't have the blessing of God. You can't have it. It's not for you. Okay? You can't have it. You can't have access to God or his blessing unless you make me, Moses, and my bloodline the leader from now on. And that's how it's been and that's how it's going to be. All right? Get in line. See, it sounds like the king wants you to let him be in charge and don't worry about how he destroys society so he can make money off of it, because that's the only way you can get this blessing back that he took away from Adam and Eve that he gave. You know what I mean? You can never get it back without letting them be in charge, even if they destroy everything. Don't worry about that. You only got to worry about the because you can't get the blessing, man. You got to have that blessing, right? You can't have it unless you go through Moses. Hey, come on, he's got a covenant with God. And if you don't make this same covenant with God, saying that his bloodline rolls forever, even though they're horrible, horrible people, and it's a horrible, horrible bloodline. No. I think God's message is don't trust dictators, and kings are dictators. And here are a bunch of examples, right, of how they're horrible, right? And then the king got a hold of it and added on at the end, like God showing how, Abraham and Jacob and this and that is evil, and then you're supposed to see that story and say, hey, yeah, but they end every story with, oh, God made a covenant with him. Oh, Abraham wrestled with God. He's powerful. Don't worry about it. As long as you stay with the bloodline, we're as powerful as God. You know what I mean? What's the third one saying? That how, but in every story it's saying, hey, we're going to destroy everything, but don't worry, because you have no other choice. You have to follow us because that's what God wants. He wants you to follow the dictator. That's what he wants, and you can't be blessed without it. You don't follow the dictator, you don't get blessed. That's what I'm. Can you imagine, like me sitting here saying, hey, I wrote this book and God inspired it, but I wrote it, and it says that God wants you to worship my bloodline. You can only get access to him and his blessing through me and my bloodline. If we are not in charge, okay, God will never give you the blessing. And everyone's like, oh, that makes sense. So again, we're still on this Bible Project channel. If you want to go watch his full videos or whatever, it's on YouTube. But so far what we know is that God can't forgive, really. He took the blessing away from humans and gave them a bloodline. and kicked him out of the Garden of Eden. Said, don't eat that knowledge. Get out of here, you bum. And then he, the people kept being horrible, and so he killed everybody except for the bloodline, that he promised, and when it kicked out people out of the Garden of Eden. That bloodline, he made sure that Noah's bloodline was good, the monarchy, And they want you to know, just like Jesus, you can't get into heaven unless you believe Jesus' bloodline, goes to God, and also goes to King David, which goes to Moses, which goes to Abraham, which obviously everyone goes to Noah. So they want you to know that you can't get that blessing back. See, God took that blessing away from humans, when they screwed up in the Garden of Eden. You can never get that blessing back unless you let this bloodline be leaders. You let them be the kings, Abraham, Moses. You got to let them be the kings. And even though they're going to destroy everything because they're kings, and so they're horrible, horrible people, right? They're inbred, horrible people. They're dictators, okay? So he's saying that the Christian Bible is saying that it doesn't matter. Don't worry. You have to endure the king ruining. And keep in mind, who's writing this Bible? King Moses, who has the same bloodline, and that's why he's saying that he has a covenant with God. You know what I mean? He's saying that you can't, you have to endure the horribleness of it, because otherwise you can't get the blessing. You lost that blessing because of Adam and Eve, and you'll never get it back unless you let all these people that have this bloodline be in charge. And the people, and you know it because it's written in the Bible. And the Bible was written by the same king who's telling you this, and has the same bloodline. So this is not circular reasoning. It's not circular reasoning in any way. We know it's all true because the king told us it was true. It's kind of like saying we know it was true because it was on the internet. It's like, what the heck? We know it's true because the dictator wrote the Bible, and in the Bible, the dictator said that even though he wrote it, it was inspired by God. Okay? And this is really what God wants. God wants him to be king and his bloodline to be king forever. That's what he wants. God doesn't like democracy and elections and stuff like that. No. and it's not King Moses saying this stuff. He's writing the books, the Bible, but he isn't the one saying it. No, it's inspired by God. See? So this all makes sense. All right. So we're going to go all the way up to Kings, right? I might not be able to finish this in this week's sermon. I might have to continue it to next week's sermon. But we're at the book of Numbers right now. And it's basically, Moses let them out of Egypt. And he made this covenant with God because he has the same bloodline as Abraham. This covenant goes all the way back to Adam and Eve, this promise of this bloodline. And Moses is part of this bloodline. He's part of this monarchy, this royal blood that's blessed. Okay, and you can't get that blessing back unless you let him be leader, let all his people be leaders. But anyway, so he leads them out of Egypt, and then he goes up on a hill and comes down with the 10 Commandments, and then they finally get to the Promised Land, or they get to some place, and that's where they're at right now. They get to this place, they build a bunch of stuff, and then God wants to lead them back out of that place, right, into the desert, so that they can finally find this Promised Land, I think. Let's hear what he says.
The Book of Numbers. This fourth book of the Bible carries forward the story of Israel after their exodus from slavery in Egypt. God had brought them to Mount Sinai, and he entered into a covenant with them.
Remember, the covenant is that anyone who follows the bloodline, as long as you let this bloodline lead you and be kings, be the leader, then you'll be okay. And you don't have to worry about them destroying society all the time. Each king, every one of them destroying everything. Don't worry about that. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you let them still be kings for the end of time, because this is what God wants. You can't get the blessing unless you do this, man. And King Moses wrote this Bible, wrote this book here, But, he didn't just write it like he just, because he's a king and he wrote it like a king would write it. No. It was inspired by God. He hates democracy, apparently.
There. And despite Israel's rebellion, God had graciously provided a way for Israel to live near his holy presence in the tabernacle. So the book of Numbers begins as Israel wraps up their 1-year stay at Mount Sinai, and they head out into the wilderness on their way to the land that God promised Abraham. Now the book's storyline is designed according to the stages of their journey. So the first section begins at Mount Sinai, but then they set out and travel to the wilderness of Paran. And then from there, they travel to the plains of Moab, which is right across from the Promised Land. Now the first part...
I want you to remember, when he's talking about Abraham, before Abraham, God can't give. He throws you out of the Garden of Eden, takes away his blessing, right? Then you got Cain and Abel and all his crazy people, right? So he can't forgive them. He actually kills the entire planet except for Noah's bloodline, right? And then then they start building Babylon, and they don't want to follow God or whatever again, and so God destroys all Babylon, right? Then God gives us, and this is Moses, the King Moses telling us this, okay? So it's got to be true, right? Dictators never lie. And he's saying the whole stories of Abraham, there's 3 of them, where Abraham just keeps doing the same thing that Adam and Eve did, the same thing that Cain and Abel did, the same thing that Babylon was doing, you know what I mean? And yet, because he's blessed, it's okay? It doesn't matter how evil he is, as long as everyone else is keeping him in power, keeping him being the king, then it's okay. And if you don't do that, like you want to get democracy maybe, or elections or something, no. You lose his blessing. You can only get his, just like Jesus, you can't get into heaven unless you unless you follow his bloodline, that he's the Son of God. His blood is the Son of God. Same here. You can't get, your blessing back unless you say that this bloodline, you let the bloodline lead, no matter what. Even though the bloodline is horrible and the kings are horrible, you still have to do it, God says, because he don't want democracy, and he wants you to know that don't worry, you can destroy the bloodline can destroy everything and be horrible, but you have to just follow him blindly, and if you don't, you're going to pay.
Opens with a census where the people are numbered. That's where the book gets its name. And then there are laws about how the tribes of Israel were to be arranged in their camp. So the tabernacle was to be at the center, and then around that the priests and the Levites, and then around them the 12 tribes neatly arranged with Judah at their head. Now this was all an elaborate symbol about how God's holy presence was at the center of their existence as a people. This is all followed by a whole series of laws that develop the purity laws from the book of Leviticus. If God's presence was going to be in their midst, every effort should be made to make the camp pure, a place that welcomes God's holiness. In chapter 10, the cloud of God's presence lifts from the tabernacle and guides Israel away from Sinai out into the wilderness, and immediately things go terribly wrong. So in chapter 11, the people start complaining about their hunger and thirst and how they want to go back to Egypt. And then in chapter
they want to turn their backs on Moses and the bloodline and go back to Egypt to another king.
Chapter 12, Moses' own brother and sister begin opposing and bad-mouthing him in front of all of the people. This trip is not off to...
Remember, Aaron's supposed to be he's the high priestess. He's the high, priest or prophet or whatever. Funny how they both have Abraham's bloodline, right? Moses and Aaron, and one becomes the leader, and all his kids become leaders after that. And Aaron becomes the prophet or the priest, and all his descendants become priests also. Right? So Moses writes the Bible, and he's the leader, and Aaron is the priest, and he's the one who interprets the Bible and tells the masses what God is saying and stuff. And they're brothers from the same royal bloodline. Okay, this is what God wants? Really? Sounds like something Moses wants.